the way it becomes unhealthy is when believers, or rather if it's leaders or whatever it may be who is involved in this specific ministry, when they don't think it could ever become unhealthy. The interesting thing about ministry is people look at ministry in various ways, and I'm going to explain more of that into as we go on with the different points. But people look at ministry in various ways. They look at ministry obviously as I just described it, is to help others in need. Welcome to the Free and Redeemed podcast. I am your host, Simon Andrade, and here on this specific show, we tackle over key topics that every single Christian struggles with. We bring in guests, we bring in godly wisdom, and more importantly, we bring in scriptures in the Bible to help you enhance your walk with God, bring in confidence, and put you into the direction of freedom and grace by the power of the Holy Spirit. If you're new to this platform, I encourage you to subscribe. With all that being said, guys, let's get started with today's episode. What is up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Free and Redeemed podcast. If you're new to this channel, thank you so much for tuning in. Don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe. Again, we're posting content every other week, but I am very excited about today's episode because I really feel like this subject is something that probably needs to be discussed a little bit more in today's society, or basically you could overall just say the church, because I think that's exactly what we're going to talk about. These past few weeks, we've obviously been studying a lot about cult psychology, what makes, how can we identify cult leaders or, false teachers, false disciples, whatever we want to talk about here. But what about ministry? What about something that does appear something that anybody can get involved with? It does appear to be in an actual public church that's not isolated. What about that? Can that potentially be unhealthy as well? Well, that's what we're actually going to talk about, because I do feel like this is a subject that we need to be discussing a little bit more. But we're going to talk about 5 ways ministry could actually become unhealthy. Now, to get this episode started, we actually have to talk about what makes ministry unhealthy. Well, what makes ministry unhealthy is so many ways we can really talk about, but we first have to ask the question, what is ministry? What do I mean when I say that simple word, ministry? Well, ministry, according to dictionary.com, really is simply described as the work or vocation of a minister of religion. Pretty simple definition, right? Well, if I had to put ministry in my own words, I would really say ministry is a group. It could really be described as a group of believers or group of Christians serving others in various ways in their community. Most of the time, I guess the way you can really describe ministry is a group or organization that is usually part of a church organization, or they're a part of a certain congregation, they're a part of a certain community, or whatever you really want to describe. And ministry, in a way, it does require a lot of commitment from these group of people. It's usually more than one person. But what makes this unhealthy? Well, what we have to really talk about here, I think there's various scriptures that we could really talk about with ministry, but I think the more accurate definition, or the accurate scripture that I think really greatly describes ministry, is in 1 Peter chapter 4 verse 10, where Peter simply just says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others. Again, that's 1 Peter chapter 4 verse 10. So in so many words, I think a better way to really describe what ministry is, it's a group of believers, but you could say they're a part of a church, they're a part of a community, a part of a school, whatever it may be. And in some way, they are using their calling, or they're using their gift to serve their community or serve other believers, or whatever you really want to say here. And there's various ways we could really kind of pick this apart. I mean, good examples I can give is, for example, there could be a ministry of evangelism. Another one, I'm sure this is a very common one or popular one, is a worship ministry. A group of musicians, rather if it's guitarists, drummers, bass players, group of singers come together. They usually perform at their church, they sing, and overall you can call that a worship ministry or a youth ministry. There has to be obviously a leader, a pastor, who is guiding and leading a bunch of young teenagers, mostly high school age, if not young adult age, and just a handful of others, women's ministry, men's ministry, catering ministry, or food bank ministry, whatever it may be. It's a group of people being used by God in some way. And all this stuff, can you look at it? I mean, we could all look at ministry and we could say ministry is a really great thing, or a great way to really be used by God, and a great way for us as believers to come together, not just attend service, not just hear a sermon every Sunday, but actually connect and really learn how to be used in a very effective way. That's what we could really describe ministry as. Now, how can that become unhealthy? Well, in today's episode, again, I'm going to talk about 5 ways ministry could actually become unhealthy. And the first point I really want to give to really identify this is number 1. This is actually kind of a tricky one, but it's when people don't think ministry can be unhealthy. We just described of what ministry is. Now we have to understand how ministry can become unhealthy. Well, right off the back, I'm letting people know the way it becomes unhealthy is when believers, or rather if it's leaders or whatever it may be who is involved in this specific ministry, when they don't think it could ever become unhealthy. You know, the interesting thing about ministry is people look at ministry in various ways, and I'm going to explain more of that as we go on with the different points. But people look at ministry in various ways. They look at ministry, obviously, as I just described it, is to help others in need, to serve people in some way. A lot of people look at it as to help the church, to be a volunteer. The church needs help organizing an event, obviously putting chairs away. The church needs help parking cars, taking care of children, whatever it may be. People look at ministry as a way, hey, I want to volunteer. I want to help out. I know obviously the pastor or the leaders, they can't do this alone. Another way people could look at ministry is a way to help God. What do I mean when I say that? Well, they think if they get involved in ministry, this is a way that they are helping God and, using his message, even in nonverbal ways. Sometimes I think that's the best way you can describe servanthood, is basically showing the image of Christ without even saying a single word to somebody. At the end of the day, you are giving God's message. Or, the plain and simple one, why do most people get involved in ministry? It's simply what? To be used by God. They want to be used by God in some way. And sometimes it could be in the most simplest things. It could be just greeting people at your church, opening the door. Hi, welcome. So glad you're here. There's different areas, right? I gave certain examples. So how can all this become unhealthy? Well, we have to understand something. When people get involved in ministry, we have to identify why they are getting involved in ministry. What's their motive? What's their heart? You see what I mean? The way people, or depending on how people view ministry, I think is where we really have to start and really understand of what the whole entire purpose of why they're getting involved, or overall why they're leading a ministry. Sometimes people start ministries and we have to really understand, where's their heart really coming from. Ultimately, I think that's the biggest problem that we have seen to date in church. A lot of times today, when we hear about people who go through church hurt, when we hear about people that go through religious trauma, most of the time, if not, I would say 90% of the time, it's probably coming from somebody who was involved in a ministry. They were involved in some type of group. They were committed to something in a church, in an organization, and however their heart was, depending on what their motives were of getting involved, that's what we really need to determine here. Some people can get involved in ministry and they may have the wrong heart. A few weeks ago, or maybe actually a month ago, I talked about the Jezebel spirit. And one of the things I talked about is I said, a Jezebel spirit usually will get highly involved in something, or most of the time it's a church. They'll highly get involved in a ministry right away because they want to be noticed, and most of the time their goal is really just to be on top right away. Somehow figure out their way to get to the top. That's kind of the stuff that we really have to identify here. Also, let me just say it like this. Most people look at ministry when they get involved as a way of, hey, this is something that it's going to determine my relationship with God. It's going to determine my salvation. The most crazy part about ministry, or what the biggest flaw of that belief is, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to be using the ministry they were involved with, or using the ministry that they led as a way, or as a reason of why they should be getting into heaven on Judgment Day. I mean, the simple verse is right there, Matthew chapter 7, verse 22. You could read it yourself. This started right off the bat. Let me just say it like this. God is not set on your salvation by what ministry you get involved with. I'm not saying that God doesn't care about you getting involved in a ministry, but let me just say it like this. You getting involved in a ministry does not determine the strength of your salvation. It does not set you up for a higher reward. It doesn't set you up for anything. What is the purpose of ministry? It's just an opportunity to become Christ-like, to express the love of God to other people while walking with other people in that specific ministry or group that you're in part of. That's the simple purpose of ministry. But I think, again, it all starts by how people view the ministry they're getting involved with, why they're getting involved to begin with, and how much they truly worship it, because that is a true thing today. And I have seen this time and time again. People begin to fall into this mindset where they begin to worship ministry than they do their own relationship with God. I actually talk about that in the Jezebel Spirit episode. I encourage you to go check that out. Link will be in the description. And when people have that mindset, let me just say it like this: they don't think ministry could ever be unhealthy, and everything that's done, even though it's clearly unhealthy, or some of the stuff that's done, they just don't think it's ever unhealthy, because in a way they connect it with their relationship with God. But moving on to number 2, what are the other ways that we can identify, okay, if people can't believe that ministry can be unhealthy, what can we identify that does make ministry unhealthy when people get involved? Well, number 2, I think, is pretty straightforward. Number 2, I like to describe this point as when ministry becomes a mandatory obligation versus an option. I'm going to rephrase that. When ministry becomes mandatory versus optional. Plain and simple, right? Let's ask this question. Does every Christian have to be involved in a ministry? No, they do not. Let me tell you this. Sometimes I think the most effective Christians, the most effective believers out there, I'm not trying to stereotype anybody or saying if you're in a ministry, you're already on the wrong path. I'm not saying that. But I think what I'm trying to say here is some of the most effective believers today are the people that are not out there trying to get involved in a ministry, that are trying to get involved in a ministry to be seen somehow. Hey, I need to get involved in this to express my singing gift. Some of the most effective people are the people that just don't need to get involved in something, and they're out there and they're being effectively used by God in various ways. They're out there and they're, you know what? They're just simply preaching their testimony at their school. They're simply just having a conversation with somebody at a doctor's waiting room, whatever it may be. These are people that are effectively being used by God in very unique ways. That's what we could really describe here. But the question, I think that, the mindset I think we really just need to get out of the way is when people get involved in ministry, sometimes, and I got to say this, I'm going to explain more of how this really relates to me, is we have this mindset of, I have to do it. I have to be involved in this for various reasons. Ministry, let's just say this, it's optional. Do you have to be a part of the church choir? Well, first of all, if you can't sing, no, then don't get involved if you can't sing. Do you have to be a part of the usher ministry? Not necessarily. However, if this is something you feel like God is calling you to be a part of and get involved with, then by all means, sign up and figure out how to get involved. But if people in your church are pressuring you to get involved, are pressuring you and basically determining your calling for you, this is where you have to stop and think. Is it necessary for other believers to make ministry a mandatory obligation that every believer in their church or every believer who attends Sunday service has to be involved with? No, because here's the thing, ministry was always meant to be optional. It was always meant to be an opportunity. That's how ministry really needs to be addressed in the first place, as an opportunity to what? To get closer to God? Not necessarily, in a way, yes, but no, as an opportunity to be used to what? As what Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10, to use your gift or whatever God is leading you to do in your life. It should be presented as an opportunity, not as this obligation, not as this thing like, hey, you have to do this. If you're not serving with God, then you're probably not serving God at all. That should not be the message. There are various ways we could be used in the kingdom, but being forced to be a part of a ministry is not the answer. Moving on to number 3, if somebody does get involved in a ministry, what makes it unhealthy? Well, this is a pretty straightforward point, and I'm sure a lot of people may understand this, but let's just throw it out there. Number 3 is when it's treated like a job. I'm going to say this, probably 9 times out of 10, when you serve in a ministry, more than likely you're not getting hired for a position. More than likely, it's an opportunity of you to volunteer with your church in some type of way. But there's a big issue that I have seen, and I have even personally experienced this in my walk with God various times. I'm using that serving in a way as a volunteer opportunity, volunteering to help somebody else. But a lot of leaders today or pastors treat it like if they're hiring people for their position. What's the big difference between that? Well, let's just use this example. More than likely, there's going to be a list of guidelines, a list of responsibilities, a list of expectations that you have to meet if you want to apply for this position. Why is that? Because at the end of the day, people are hiring you for a specific expertise that you're bringing to the table for a company, right? A company, an actual company, The church was never supposed to be treated like a company. But I think the issue that we see today is we treat it like a company. So when someone applies for a job, there's standards and guidelines and expectations. Why? Because at the end of the day, there's a return of investment that is given to the person who's applying for that job, you know? And I'm not saying that no ministry shouldn't have guidelines, they shouldn't have expectations. I'm not saying that, or standards. I think it's important for every ministry to have standards. If you have a group of people that are taking time out of their week, taking time out of their day, taking time out of their month to serve you or to help you in whatever ministry that you are a part of that's involving obviously organization, your job is to not breathe down their neck 24/7 if they don't show up. If they're volunteering, be grateful that they're volunteering. But I think the biggest issue that we're seeing a lot of times today in different types of church organizations is just the lack of help or the lack of assistance that a lot of these pastors and a lot of people are getting involved with. Sometimes, and let me just say it like this, there are some churches, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with this, that do actually have to hire people, that do have to, in a way, run this not so much like a business, but run this like an actual organization. That does require experience, that does require an expertise, and requires a person's time more than one day out of the week, if not 2 days out of the week. This requires their full-time attention. And that's understandable. For example, if they have to hire an accountant to manage the finances of the church, if they have to hire a janitor to keep the church clean, if they have to, and this is kind of the positions I know we've heard a lot, if they have to hire a set of worship leaders, if there comes a point where they have to actually pay their worship staff, or they have to pay if they have multiple pastors in a church that takes up a lot of their time to be a shepherd, then sometimes, yes, I do believe, hey, that could be honored, and that is something that, you know, that needs to be paid as long as they follow the standards and guidelines. But most of the time, when it comes to serving in the church, when it comes to serving in a ministry, it doesn't require experience. Nobody needs experience to be an usher. Nobody needs experience to do a camera. Well, sometimes in some cases, yes. Do they need training? Of course they do. But most of the time, this is stuff that people can easily start and easily get the hang of in a few days. And what's really making me say this, and it's really tough for me explaining this, but because I know some people may listen who used to be a part of a ministry or an actual church I used to be a part of. There are some pastors today that are obviously shorthanded. And it's in various areas, parking cars, to greeting, to having ushers and security, making sure everything's taken care of, making sure everybody's in order and nothing crazy is going on in the church. They need media staff or, media people on the ministry where people know how to control the sound. They know how to turn on a camera, film the camera, control the batteries, or people that manage the screen. A lot of times that's actually something I was a part of. But I think the biggest issue that my previous church was facing is we were shorthanded almost all the time. We were always shorthanded. And the biggest issue that we were facing is because since this was a volunteer position, we were really just going based off of people's schedule. But a lot of times I think when people are shorthanded, there's a high dependency that happens with the people that are loyal, with the people that obviously do show up more. And therefore it becomes like a job. It becomes like, hey, are you going to be here today? Are you going to be here next week? Are you going to be here this week? If you're not going to be here, okay, well, what are we going to do then? And it's just like it becomes a big mess. And something I've really learned about ministry, especially with the church I'm actually a part of right now, is organization is key. It's very difficult to ask people for help. We could really use you as volunteers. Again, it goes back to that thing, the opportunity to volunteer, the opportunity of being a part of something that is special and not pressuring them of deep commitment. Because I used to do the media for a previous church of mine. The media was simply just creating slideshows, putting up, a lot of stuff on the big screen, especially when it came to worship lyrics and creating sermons. It's actually how I'm able to do a lot of this YouTube editing right now. But I think the biggest pressure that a lot of people were facing when they were signing up for this was feeling the pressure of commitment. When they realized that they had to commit to this, boom, I would stop hearing from them. But not to compare churches or anything, but I'm noticing with the church that I'm actually attending right now is when you serve, you are not pressured to commit. You are pressured to show up. Of course, I mean, you're not pressured, but you're encouraged to show up. Obviously, there's training. But at the same time, it's like, hey, using this as an opportunity to volunteer and to be a part of a certain ministry. And you chose your schedule, you chose your days. And I'm realizing, hey, when you ask people for help, there's gratitude that's also given back in return. And that's how I feel like when I'm understanding, wow, this is a healthy way to run ministry. not pressuring people like as if you're hiring them for a job application or anything like that, but actually just saying, hey, thank you so much for helping us out. As our way of saying thank you. I'm not saying you have to give people rewards, but it's our way of saying thank you, is our way of, for you connecting. Hey, here's a complimentary lunch. Here's this, here's that. All this stuff, this is stuff that it's a very healthy way to run ministry. But if it's treated like a job, man, it could be so overwhelming for certain people, especially if they are not reaping the return of investment on their time as if they were being hired for a job. Because that's the toughest part about ministry, is it takes up a lot of your time. But as much as we could talk about that specific point, I think another key issue that we have to look at right here, and this is a very key point to really understand if you're dealing with a ministry that's becoming unhealthy, is number 4, is when rest is not prioritized. When rest is not prioritized at all. So many Christians today, I'm going to say it, and even one of my guests actually talked about this in one of my last guest episode. She basically said it, many Christians today are feeling extreme emotional burnout, especially when it comes to Christians who are involved in ministry. I think the simple reason why is because I think there is a lot of Christians today that are very unaware of the importance of rest as what the Bible describes. A lot of people think that the Sabbath is Old Testament stuff and hey, we don't need to look at that. But no, the Bible is very key or very clear that it's important for us as Christians, us as believers to rest. What do I mean rest? To take some time off, to take some time to not just focus all the time on ministry, not just focus all the time on, serving. Sometimes it takes people just taking a step back, taking a break, and that is 100% okay. And the Bible actually honors this. There's different scriptures, and the first scripture that I know a lot of people may say that comes to mind is in Genesis, where God created the earth in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rested. One of my favorite verses that actually talks about rest is in Hebrews chapter 4, verses 9 through 10, where it simply says, right here, the author of Hebrews says, "Here remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also enters rest from their works, just as God did from his." Again, Hebrews chapter 4, verses 9 through 10. Let me just say it like this. A ministry that does not prioritize rest will face extreme conflict. A ministry that doesn't prioritize a person taking certain times out of the week, sometimes maybe even certain months, if somebody needs to take a month off and, hey, I can't do ministry right now, that is 100% okay. If your concern is, but we're shorthanded, what are we going to do here? If you're a pastor or a leader, that is your responsibility. That is your responsibility to bring people to the table, know how to bring people and organize that. I'm not saying it has to be specifically the pastor. If they have somebody or a specific leader organizing that, that's their job. That's their standard. That is, and they should not be putting the pressure on other people to do it for them. Plain and simple. That is what we need to talk about here. Is if you're a part of a ministry, prioritize rest. Take some time away if you have to. If you can't do it one week, if you're going to say, hey, this specific day I can't do it, there should not be a question. Why not? Why can't you? No, respect it. And make sure that you create an organization where if somebody can't do something one week, you have somebody else in mind, or you have another person in the church who's trained, even though they don't even have to be a part of that certain ministry, they're trained to run something. Plain and simple. But if you are a leader or a pastor of a ministry, don't freak out. Don't get upset at your members or your volunteers. Plain and simple. The final point, I'm going to say it, but let me just say this. I'm going to go through a list of certain things I have personally witnessed in ministry, not specifically with the previous church I have. Some of these actually may apply to the previous church I was a part of, not all of them. But the list I read over, if you are experiencing this in a ministry, then leave this ministry if this is occurring. But the last and final point where ministry is becoming unhealthy is when ministry becomes your whole identity. When it's determining you as a Christian, when it's determining everything about your walk with God. What do I mean when I say this? Well, let me just give some examples, these list of examples here. Again, I'm not telling you, hey, pack your bags, leave your church, but this is really unhealthy stuff. And no Christian should be put through this. So what I'm saying is if this applies to you and the ministry you're involved with, I would actually encourage to actually leave this ministry because it's not healthy for you. First example, the ministry is unorganized and the leader and pastor blames you instead of handling it himself or herself. If they blame you, if I just basically talked about this and the rest and the job point, the last 2 points. If you're under a pastor or a leader and there's a lot of stuff that's unorganized, let me just say this, their job as a leader, to keep that organized, to keep that in order. If they're not keeping that in order and they have to blame their volunteers, they have to blame their members, they're not taking serious accountability when really at the end of the day, the accountability should be falling on them. That's a pretty light example. The next example I'm giving here is your serving is becoming too dependable when they're expecting you every week, if not every day. When they have no one else to take care of anything, and they're expecting you to take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. Rather if it's a cleaning ministry, if it's organizing a youth event and all this stuff. If you are the top person they are looking to, they're calling you, hey, we're having this big event. Could you make these 10 social media posts, post this on this day? Oh, we're also going to need this, we're going to need that. And, they're basically throwing a lot of responsibilities at you, especially on a short amount of time. Hey, we need you to come in. We need you to take care of this. We need you to film this. All this stuff. If you're becoming 100% dependable, and again, it goes back to that last point, and they are not depending on rest, that is a big red flag and it needs to be looked at. Next one. This is a huge one. Do not listen to this. This is very wrong and this is very manipulative, especially for certain pastors who pressure their members to do this. If you are pressured to quit your job or career to serve their ministry, don't do that. Don't put your life, your responsibilities on the line to serve another member, to serve a pastor. You know what? The Lord is telling me you're idolizing your career. If it's just to serve them and take care of their responsibilities, that leader has to be accountable of handling himself, that is a very unhealthy way to do that, by pressuring you to quit your job to serve in full-time ministry. Don't listen to those manipulating lies. Oh, but you know what? The Lord is calling you to be in full-time ministry. He will provide for you. He will give you your money. He will provide it, and they don't have any resource to help you out with that. Yeah, that's manipulation, and don't listen to that. Now, I'm not saying if you feel like you need to leave your position or leave your career to go serve the Lord, and you trust that God is going to provide the resources to help you financially cover yourself, I'm not saying don't do that. If you feel like that's something God is doing to help you with another ministry, by all means do that. But I am basically saying the point is this: don't listen to somebody if they're manipulating you to do that or they're pressuring you. You need to quit your job in ministry. We need you here more often. Your job's getting in the way. No, that's wrong. Don't listen to that. I've seen that too many times, not specifically in a ministry I was involved with certain people I knew. Next, it's if you get rebuked, and we just talked about this, you get rebuked for resting. Example, if you go on vacation. Why are you going on vacation? Come on, don't you know we need you for this? We need you for Sunday if you're spending time with family. Why are you spending time with your family? You see, let me just say this. Do not get ministry confused with your relationship with God. Ministry honestly should not even be top 3 in your list. But yet so many pastors make it seem like it should be. It should be the Lord, your relationship with God, the time you spend with God. If you're married, obviously your spouse or your family, they'll just say this, family number 2, and then boom, whatever list is here, finances, whatever it may be. Ministry should definitely be at least top 5, if not top 10. Ministry is not your walk with God. Plain and simple, guys. So if you're spending time with family, do not let a pastor rebuke you for saying, so you're putting your family before God. No, you're putting your family before the ministry. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't let anybody confuse that. Another thing too, or if you just need to tend to something else, that is okay. But moving on, these are big examples here. Last few and I'm done. It's just simply if your pastor or leader commands you to do a lot, but they do not serve at all. I'm just going to say this. Every pastor, I believe, should have a servant's heart right from the get-go. That should be the initial foundation of a pastor's heart, is they are willing to serve others. Because why? Jesus was willing to serve others. Jesus did the most simple things for people, including that scripture where he washed his disciples' feet. And they felt like, why are you washing my feet? And he says, you don't realize what I'm doing, but you will in the long run. That is the simple image that Jesus brought to the table. is to wash others' feet. If you have a pastor who does not wash others' feet, what do I mean when I say this? Doing the simple things for his congregation or his members, then this is not right. If he's the type of, I'm just going to be in my office, I'm the one who gets treated like royalty and all of you do everything for me, that is not healthy. That is not a healthy authority to be a part of. If it's 90% of them being treated like royalty in anything, and this is the final point here, final 2 points. If your pastor or leader is making you do very unnecessary work that has nothing to do with ministry, nothing to do with serving the church. Hey, go wash my dishes. Hey, I need you to shine my shoes. Hey, I need you to go into the bathroom or to my bathroom and clean my house. Hey, I need you to go buy me some coffee. Oh no, I'm not going to pay you back. You're going to pay for it. Or, all these unnecessary things. What is that? That's not help. That's not serving anybody. That's not serving the Lord. That's just simply being taken advantage of. You don't need to be a part of that. Or last and final point, and this is something I can confidently say, get out of this ministry if this is you or if this applies to you. If your salvation is jeopardized for not meeting ministry expectations, if you're not fully meeting the ministry expectations, so therefore they tell you you're probably not saved or you're falling away from God, you're forsaken because you're not giving them their way. This is stuff that needs to be looked at. These are key examples, guys, but let me just say this. Yes, ministry can be unhealthy. And sometimes we need to wake up and see the red flags, especially when we're getting involved with a specific organization or group. That obviously is asking for help. There's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes people cannot be taken advantage of the help that they get. Do you guys agree with the 5 ways that ministries can be unhealthy? Let me know in the comments. But guys, thank you so much for tuning in for today's episode. With all that being said, thanks and God bless.